Thanks again to our sponsors Hit Point Press and their Fable Makers deck. Alright guys, Jameson and Alex here. Today we are going to be going over ONE D&D.
They didn't use the terminology like 5.5, but it feels like they're pushing it toward a revision like a 0.5 edition. They want to try to move away from like numbered edition.
Right.
It's just like, this is the most updated rule set overview in this video, and then save more of our detailed discussion and opinion for future videos.
Really four primary things, which is the races, the backgrounds, the feats, and the rules revisions, basically.
Yeah.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for our D&D Beyond Players Bundle giveaway.
Yes.
But yeah, let's just jump straight into it. Big focus on D&D Beyond now that Wizards of the Coast actually acquired them.
Yeah.
So with that, they're going to be doing digital and physical bundles of books, which the first one is going to be Dragonlance. They also are creating their own online platform using Unreal Engine, which I'll put some clips of that. It looks really good.
Yeah.
Some people might really like it if they wanted a more realistic alternative to like Roll20 or something like that. Mm-hmm. But other people might feel like it's a little bit more of a video game at that point,
Sure.
which is understandable. To teach their own, you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but they're going to offer more functionality through D&D Beyond.
So one of the things with this is the UA release. We'll go over the kind of the first one that's come out with character origins. They talk about wanting to have a new UA every month or so-ish to over the course of the next year to year and a half. Because it's talking about this coming out in 2024. Never a bad thing. There's no such thing as too much playtesting.
And another thing they wanted to really stress is that it was backwards compatible. So any rules changes, if you wanted to go back and use those rules for the Curse of Strahd book you bought in 5th edition, you can do that.
Fire away.
The big asterisk with that is they are releasing a new player's handbook, monster manual, and a Dungeon Master's Guide, which they want to make it easier and more accessible to newer DMs, which all for that.
The biggest thing that they have changed so far kind of with races and backgrounds to me is the stat changes. So no longer, again, this is all UA, all tentatively changed.
Right.
But again, with a UA that's 21 pages, they're probably not going to make a lot of significant changes to this.
Probably
maybe
not.
some fine tuning as far as uses and maybe add something here,
Outside
take a
of
small thing
maybe
away.
the rule stuff, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But as far as like the way the races and backgrounds work, I think are a lot closer to where they will stay permanently. So like I said, your +1 to this, +2 to this is no longer going to be coming from your race selection. That's going to be tied into your background. And the reasoning they give, which again makes sense, is that your background is more about your character, what you've been doing.
Right.
So what you've been spending your time and your effort in, that's where you have become above the norm. And they've also made a conscious effort to have races have their own unique ability. Besides just passive things and advantage on this, or some small things they do, some kind of interesting active ability they can generate.
Right. So I think one of the better examples of that, and we'll go over all of the races that they have in the UA in a separate video in detail. Just to give all of our thoughts, because there is a lot going on with all of these. But just as a summary of everything, one good example is for the dwarves. They've removed sub-races, so there's not like hill dwarf anymore or anything like that. And the reason they wanted to do that kind of thing is to introduce lineages. So with the lineages, we kind of had that in Ravenloft and some of the other books recently. So it's more of a social category, the old system with hill dwarves and mountain dwarves and all that kind of thing. Whereas they wanted to just make dwarves and then make them, as Jeremy Crawford says, the dwarviest dwarves and the elviest elves.
Yes.
So one of the examples for the usable ability that a race would get is now dwarves have a tremor sense as a bonus action, which they can use a certain number of times a day. They touch surface and they can gain tremor sense, which makes sense. They're all about mountains and rocks and stuff like that. So they want to really dig deep into the mythical lore of these races and really double down.
What makes this race?
Right. A lot of races didn't really have necessarily a really impactful racial ability. One thing I think people might be disappointed with is they mentioned half races, which they talked about how there's half elves and things like that currently. But now in the interview Jeremy Crawford did, they talk about how you can choose two parents and aesthetically make yourself look however you want, but then you pick one of the race's features and abilities. I hope that isn't the extent to it, because it is interesting to have maybe mixed abilities. But I do understand the complexity it is to try to make a system where you're not just taking the best things of two things and mashing them together.
Yeah.
So there is a little
gnomes come to mind.
Yeah, right. So we're a little bit of a gray area on here right now as to how half races will actually work mechanically. In the UA, they just mention that it's basically just flavor now. There's not really any ability differences. We'll see if that changes in the future, but for now, that's just how it is.
Yep. They do introduce a new race as well with the Ardling, which is a celestial-like race, but again, we'll cover that more in a more detailed discussion video. Just kind of wanted to touch on that. With your backgrounds, besides the whole stat bonus thing I mentioned a while ago, the other big change here is going to be they're completely customizable if you so choose them to be.
Right.
Instead of just picking to be an acolyte, a sailor, a guild master, a whatever, you can. Those still exist in the UA as like sample backgrounds, which you can take. Not comfortable, go customizable, kind of dipping your feet in the water there.
Yeah, people that if you want if you're too lazy to do it, or not creative enough, or you just want to make a quick build, they want to have those options available to those players just to make it easy. But one of the biggest changes on here, besides the ability score being tied to background instead of race now, is each background gets a feat. A level 1 feat.
This very important distinction.
It's a whole new thing now.
A level 1 feat.
Feats, which we'll get to feats in a minute here, but basically, when you are customizing your background, you're going to get your 3 ability scores, either 2 and 1 or 1, 1, 1, for how you want to distribute those.
Yep.
You get 2 skill proficiencies, 1 tool proficiency, and 1 language. So, in your character origin, you automatically know common, and then your background gives you a language, and then you also get to choose another language in your character creation process. So you'll know 3 languages based on that. Mm-hmm. Another thing they wanted to make sure is that the starting equipment, everyone had the same gold value, because in the original player's handbook, some backgrounds would have more gold value worth of materials.
Yeah, and for campaigns where DMs were very restrictor on the rules about spending your money, how much money you have, and really keeping track of that mattered a whole lot more. And it was really put some characters behind playing what they wanted to play. Mm-hmm. And this is a simple quality of life change that really takes away that hindrance.
Right. So they basically, to sum it up, is they basically just made a lot of the stuff just cost the same amount, like 15 gold. And then every background starts with 50 gold to purchase equipment with.
Yeah.
So that's just an easy way to simplify that. Now, talking about feats, on this side of things, there are now multiple criteria associated, tied to feats. First of which is a level requirement.
Yep.
So level 1 feats are going to be something that have utilities, some light impact, according to Jeremy Crawford. Then you might have like level 4 feats. You might have level 20 feats, which could be incredibly impactful. So depending on how they proceed with those, they wanted to make it easy for you to pick feats without just seeing this huge wall of here's 50 options.
Because there's so many.
So now if you see I'm making a background, I can only choose level 1 feats. You can automatically dismiss level 4 feats, level 8 feats, whatever, all those higher level feats. You don't have to look through those. You only have to look through the level 1 ones. The other thing with the level requirements is they also sometimes will have prerequisites, they said, though none of the feats in the UA have any prerequisites. So there could be some feats tied specifically to racial options, which we've seen before in the past, or class options, who knows. And even in like Dragonlance, they had some backgrounds tied to some level requirements and things like that in the Dragonlance UA that they did in the past. Lastly, some of the feats can be repeatable, which means you can take them multiple times. So for example,
Magic Initiate.
So with Magic Initiate, we get into a whole nother topic, which we will touch on here in a minute. But basically, one of the biggest things they wanted to change with the feats is obviously the level requirements, but also Jeremy Crawford mentions that there were certain feats that you saw the name of it, and for example, healer feat.
Yeah.
You could be, a life cleric and think, oh, a healer feat, I should get that. But then if you actually read it, it doesn't really make sense for you as a spellcasting healer to take the healer feat, because it's dealing with, medicine check and, the pack that goes along with that.
Yeah.
So what they wanted to do was give classes that, if you're playing a class that doesn't necessarily heal, it's beneficial to you, but if you are playing a healer, it still makes sense for you to take something like the healer feat.
Yeah.
So with that, for example, with the healer feat, one of the things on here is you still have the healing that you can use from the pack, but now whenever you roll a 1, you also get an additional ability to re-roll the healing if you roll a 1.
It just helps out your floor and helps out the feels bad.
Right. So they want to have like something innately impactful and then some kind of utility that's tied along with it. Another quick mention on here is the alert feat. It used to just benefit you, but now you have the ability to swap places with someone else as well in the initiative order. So they want to give more utility to the feats in general. So that's kind of the biggest changes with those.
Gives you an opportunity to share it with somebody else, making it much more viable as an option, not just a like, oh, me help me situation.
Kind of the last thing to touch on here, rules changes, which we're going to kind of, again, gloss over these, just give you a broad overview, and then we have lots of thoughts and discussion about each of these things individually. We could talk a long time on, so we want to break this out. So just to give you a quick summary, D20 test now is going to be the term for attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws. Instead of saying, whenever you make one of those 3 things, then I would just say D20 test. And one of the things that might surprise people is ability checks innately in the player's handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide. Rolling a 1 or a 20 was not an auto success or failure.
It is now.
They wanted to add that on there because a lot of people already play it that way anyways.
Which to me makes sense because there are times where because of your bonus you could roll a 1 and you could still get over a low DC. Right. Especially if it's a skill check and you have expertise in it and things like that. Which to me, if it's a 1, like you have found a crack in the ground, you have put your toe in it, you will face plant on the ground trying to do what you're trying to do. No, it doesn't happen.
And of course, giving you that chance to succeed something you otherwise would have no bearing.
Zero chance.
The only issue with this that I see potentially is it puts more emphasis on the DMs to make sure that they understand how checks work. Because a lot of newer DMs don't understand that you have to give ability for the check to be made. So if something is impossible, you don't let them roll for it. You just say it's impossible. So because you might think, well, they shouldn't be able to jump a 100-foot chasm because they roll a nat 20. It's like, well, they shouldn't be rolling in the first place. Which they actually say in the Dungeon Master's Guide to only call for ability checks if there's a chance of success or failure.
If
there is no chance of success or failure, you shouldn't be calling for it in the first place. So that does put a little bit more on the DMs that are maybe newer. Another major thing on here is critical hits. Made a big touch on these. Now only players can critically hit. And one of the other big things with that is only weapon attacks and unarmed strikes benefit from critical hits. So spells cannot critically hit.
Correct.
They did note that this critical hit rule is probably the most open to be changed. They just want to try it out. Because of, I think, another change on here, which is inspiration. That's a huge update, which now, whenever you roll a natural 20 on a D20 test, you gain 1 use of inspiration, which is basically just advantage whenever you want to use it. You can only have 1 at a time. But if you gain another one while you have one, you can give it to someone else in your party. So basically, because of the ability to be getting advantages more often, which is probably going to trigger more crits, they probably are thinking they need to tone down the critical hits. And also the reason they took critical hits away from monsters is because critical hits early on at low levels can kill players very easily.
Outright.
Accidentally. And what they want to basically do, it sounds like, is give more recharge abilities that have a chance to recharge. And when the DM decides I need to tone up the volume, they can use an ability that's going to, be like a dragon's breath that they have a chance to get back. So there's still that randomness involved, but they have more control over it as a DM without just accidentally killing the player.
The damage numbers don't go from 40 damage a turn to all of a sudden, well, there's 94 to 2 people. One of them is dead, and the other one is on death's door just all of a sudden.
So they wanted to make it a little bit easier for DMs to manage and not accidentally kill players.
The other 2 big changes we want to highlight are condition changes that are coming out here so far. One with grappled, speed is reduced to 0 and can't change. Attacks affected, you have disadvantage on attack rolls against any target other than the grappler. So you could, if somebody's got you grappled, you can still punch them because they're right there in your range. The grappler can drag or carry you, but the grappler suffers the slowed condition, which is the other one. That's why we did it in this order. While moving, unless you are tiny or 2 or more sizes smaller than the grappler, which again makes sense. If you're grappled by a gargantuan creature and you're medium, they can just drag you however they dang well please because they're so much bigger than you. And finally, is the biggest thing here is escape. While grappled, you can make a dexterity or strength saving throw against the grapple's escape DC at the end of each of your turns. The condition also ends if the grappler is incapacitated or if something moves you outside the grapple's range without using your speed.
Right. The other condition on here is the slowed condition, which is kind of like a mix between restrained and difficult terrain, kind of. Basically, you spend an extra foot of movement whenever you move a foot, and then attack rolls against you have advantage.
Yep.
And you also have disadvantage on dex saving throws.
I hate it.
So, yeah, it's pretty brutal, and it'll be interesting to see how they implement this in the future, because they did talk about wanting to update and test spells in future Unearthed Arcanas as well. Yeah. So maybe we're going to see some spells that had previous conditions, like paralyzed or something, maybe now give slow condition instead.
Yeah.
We'll see how that works in the future. It's kind of hard to say too much on that right now.
Yep.
And then the last major condition change that they changed on here is they made incapacitated even more brutal. Because it was just, you can't take actions or reactions.
Yeah.
Now, it's that, and if you have concentration, it breaks, which is brutal.
Yep.
And you're speechless, so you can't talk. And you're surprised. If you were incapacitated when you roll initiative, then you have disadvantage on the roll. So, incapacitated has received a major update buff. Yep. Grappled has a major update buff, and then we have the new slow condition.
Yeah. I do hope that they condense the number of conditions, which I don't like the way this is starting, considering we have a new condition already. Mm-hmm. Making changes to existing ones, okay, fine, we can have that conversation and play test those things.
And then the last major thing on here is the unarmed strike buff. Mm-hmm. So now with unarmed strikes, you can damage, which is normal, you hit something, mm-hmm. but now grapple and shove are included in the designation of unarmed strikes, which means monks, when they make unarmed strikes, flurry of blows, whatever, they can now attack or grapple or shove as part of that.
I can just imagine you like just using flurry of blows, shove, 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 shove. Yeah. just push somebody back into a wall of fire.
Yeah.
Just boom, 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 boom.
It gives them more utilities. And they did specify that they want to go over class changes. And there's going to be a lot of changes. Yeah. I mean, they're redoing the player's handbook. So there's going to be tons of changes. So I'm curious to see how that's going to impact the future. And another last thing on here, they are adding 3 new spell lists, which are Arcane, Divine, and Primal.
Yes.
And with those, basically, the way it works is essentially are split into different categories based on the source of the magic and where it's coming from. Arcane being kind of like a brute force of the multiverse magic in general.
Yep.
And then divine spells coming like from the outer planes, the divine beings, divine realms kinds of things.
Cleric and paladin.
Yep. And then primal being from the earth and nature, and even like spirits, like ghosts and things like that could be part of it.
Druid and ranger.
And with that also coming from the inner plane. So it's kind of like inner planes, outer planes,
elemental
world
planes
at large. Yeah. With the Magic Initiate, for example, you choose one from the Arcane spell list, the Divine spell list, or the Primal spell list.
Yep.
And going forward with that, it's kind of just a summary of, instead of saying, choose a spell from the Wizard, Warlock, Sorcerer, Bard spell list, you just say, choose an Arcane spell.
Arcane spell, yeah.
So and also one of the things they mentioned with this, Jeremy Crawford, is whenever they introduce a new class, such as the Artificer, they can add spells to the general lists and not have to update all of the books in the past, to add on these extra spells. So that's going to be nice for new content coming in the future.
You can definitely tell with the efforts of the spells, the D20 test, keyword situation, they're trying to find some ways to compile together certain words instead of having to repeat a paragraph. It can be like 3 words.
They're really trying to make the rules in a way that are more future-proof, so if they do add stuff in the future, they can categorize it into these more broad things instead of having to redo the rules.
It'll be a whole lot more seamless to add in new stuff.
That's a quick overview of the announcements and things that were made. We will go over these in depth because we have tons of stuff to say about each of these categories. There's a lot.
It's us, so we have things to say.
Thanks again to our sponsors, Hit Point Press and their Fable Makers deck. Omens and fortunes that you can incorporate into your campaigns. It's got books to describe ways to add these things into your campaigns, to add intrigue, plot hooks, all kinds of different ways to utilize these features.
Hey, check out this really weird or intriguing, interesting thing that kind of steer people back towards your main plotline that you're needing to advance a story you're trying to get to.
Absolutely. So guys, make sure you check out the link in the description down below. But that's going to be all for today, guys. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell notifications so you know when all of our new videos are coming out. And as always, thanks for watching.